Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Brian Luttrell. I'm a program director with RPI Consultants. With me today, I have Sara Scheu. She's Vice President of Shared Services and Solutions with Marshfield Clinic and Health System. Today we're here to talk about our implementation at Marshfield, taking them onto CloudSuite. Sara, if I could have you talk a little bit about yourself. You've been with the health system almost 20 years now, correct?
Yep.
Seen a lot of changes.
We have seen a lot of changes. So I am with Marshfield Clinic, and we'll talk about Marshfield in just a moment, but I've been in a few different roles at the Marshfield Clinic Health System. Currently, I'm our Vice President of Information Services Solutions for Shared Services. So I have our shared service solution teams. So I'm on the IT side. I did ask our supply chain, my partners in supply chain and finance and accounting to come, but they were not available. So you get me today to kind of give that reflection as we talk a little bit up today about that transition that we made as part of our progression.
On to a little bit about Marshfield.
Sure. So Marshfield Clinic, for those of you who aren't familiar, we are based in Wisconsin, so right in the center of the state. We do now have operations in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan as well, so we are in 2 states at this point, but we're a pretty old healthcare system, meaning we've been around a long time, I guess. We aren't old in another sense, but so from 1916, we actually started in kind of a unique scenario in that we started as a group of 6 doctors back in a time when doctors practiced by themselves. So we were kind of considered radical at the time, that this is an odd approach. We really grew as a clinic-based system. So we're in over 40, 50 communities across the states that we're in. We do at this point in the last 5 to 10 years, we've moved into the hospital space. So we were, for most of our life, only clinics. And so we actually came in, that's another uniqueness in that we kind of came in backwards from how a lot of other health systems in the country came into existence. And so now we do have 11 hospitals within our health system as well. And so that period of growth has been pretty short till now. It's been quick and rapid in those last 5 to 10 years. We do also have a health plan as part of our health system and a research foundation. So we're kind of a well-rounded healthcare system serving rural communities throughout the Midwest right now, Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula.
I want to talk a little bit about what you implemented on the project. You started basically late 2020 when the project got rolling, went live in March of 2022. All the FSM stuff, including your global ledger, cash management, AP, all the supply chain modules. On top of that, you also did some additional technology, Burst, App Studio, Spreadsheet Designer, and using some of the IDM pieces for POs and invoices. You also had some major interface work that we had to do into Strata, into Cerner, bunch of point of sale systems, and then also MHC for invoices and checks on that point too. So you have a pretty broad spectrum of things that we implemented right out of the gate.
Right, I would say the finance and supply chain full scope.
Suite, yeah.
We don't use it for our human capital management, but for the rest of that base set, we have moved to FSM.
Yep. So let's talk about. I'd like to talk about your project in like 3 pieces: people, technology, and process. Let's start with people. In retrospect, was the number of people per work stream you assigned adequate for the tasks on hand?
Sure. So in terms of volume of people, I think we knew going in that it was going to be tight. So we knew we weren't planning for a flush, addition or augmentation of staff. We did plan to have a bench, and we budgeted for those gaps. Buy-in to actually use what we planned for, though, was interesting. So even though we budgeted for some of that backfill, I found that just culturally, our organization across the board on our business side and our IT side, we're from the Midwest, right? We like to do things ourselves. So that the fact, I remember reminding my business partners multiple times, we budgeted for people to come in and do that work. Who can do that work? And sometimes there's this tendency to think, only I can do the work, only we can do the work. So I think in terms of filling the gaps, as they arose, I think 2 things happened. We ended up using our Infor implementation partners. We ended up using folks from RPI and your team on the business side. They did a little bit more moving of job functions and consolidation to try to get project work consolidated into fewer people's hands, and then allow for other people to kind of do the routine work. Now, that doesn't work 100% of the time, but the more we could allow people to be dedicated to the project, there was value there. So,
CloudSuite's different than S3. As you move over, things are different. The skill sets necessary for the technology piece, the skill sets necessary just in the software itself. What did you do to address getting the right skill sets for those people as we move through the project?
Yeah, I would say training was actually really a hard part of the transition. As part of the way the package worked, the way we were implementing, training happens really early for a lot of your key people. We were a 14-month implementation, and I would say in the second month of the project, there was heavy training happening. And so it was at a point when we didn't even understand what we were changing, and so we didn't really know who should even go. So we spent a lot of time arm wrestling over who should be there. I know our Infor looked at us and was like, why do you have 14 people in this training? I was like, we don't know who's going to need to use it. So there was that tension, I think. So in terms of filling the gaps or getting people the right education, in order for them to make decisions and help guide the project, they had to know things, but then they didn't know what they were learning. So that, and I don't know the solution to that. We ended up having to retrain a lot of people. So it's almost like there was the beginning of the project training that had to take place, and then there was training later, and you guys were instrumental in helping kind of plug some of those gaps and helping us say, these are some of the roles that don't seem to fully understand. Our end user training was all at the end, and that was fine, but it was really those project teams. It happened, like I said, kind of early and at a state where we didn't know what we were doing. We managed through it. So to fill the gaps, we did it, and then also using implementation partners to help with that.
From the people perspective for change management side, again, a lot of changes coming their way, changes in processes, changes in different things. How did you get the word out? How did you handle getting the word out and making sure everybody knew what was coming at them and getting them prepared?
Sure. This is something that I think we did pretty well. So we ended up with a program that we actually use now across every large implementation, and it's a Change Catalyst network. And so that Change Catalyst network really came to being during this project. And it's different from subject matter experts or super users. These were people who didn't have to be very technology savvy. They didn't even have to understand all the workflows well. They had to be people who people listened to in the department and were kind of in the know. So it was kind of trying to find those people who maybe, at the high school you always went to find out what was going on Friday night. It was finding those people in departments and bringing them together. And it was a push-pull approach where we pushed things to them that they were expected to push out to others, and we pulled from them. We learned the word on the street from those people. And again, that's a segment that doesn't always happen in a rollout, because you focus so hard on subject matter experts, super users, and the technical side. I'll talk more about this, but we were in this same time period. We were actually changing from our homegrown EHR to Cerner, so we were moving EHRs at this same time. We actually acquired 2 additional hospital systems at this time during the same time frame, and we then on the heels of that changed out our staff scheduling system. And so we were going through massive change. And again, because of that, this Change Catalyst concept has actually held through all of those, and we're enabling our teams to feel like, our frontline teams, to feel like they're staying connected to all the change that's happening that sometimes they want no part of. So I think that was a bright spot for us, I think, in the transition.
Before we move on to process, any final thoughts on people?
Yeah, so a couple other things from a people perspective, and I talk to our executive leadership inside our health system pretty often about this, that if we don't have some of these things, there's no need to even start the work. So one is just strong executive sponsorship. So if it's just some folks in supply chain who think it's time to change, or just some people, frontline in accounting, it's going to be a big struggle. So we had really strong executive leadership, and they were leaders who knew when it was their place to make decisions and when they should delegate. And that is huge. And I as we have new projects coming our way, I'm listening for that all the time. Do we have that? And if not, it's not time to start a project, because you're not gonna succeed in a way, or it's gonna be really hard to succeed. The second component of people that I would say is really important is really strong business leads. So that's different from executive sponsorship, right? Executive sponsorship can take every risk, roadblock, whatever it needs out of the way. They can just kick things down for you. Your business leads, they have to be knowledgeable, and they have to be people who are empowered and people that are trusted. So if you have a business lead who everyone rolls their eyes every time they walk into a meeting room, That's not going to work. You've got to find the people who, again, empowered. They're going to be decision makers. They're going to move things forward, because again, otherwise you're just going to swirl. I mean, you don't have these, but you're going to swirl a lot more. And then the other thing I'd say from a people side is you have to have strong project management. And that would be from your vendor partner, from your implementation partner, and internally if that's the model you're using. I will say in our case, we were in a situation where we had 2 acquisitions, an EHR transition, and this all going on at the same time, probably with 30 other things, but those were 4 really big things that many organizations would just do one of those things at a time. So we don't have a big project management office, so our project management office was, spread thin. So our project manager was a new project manager. She didn't have a lot of experience. She was making a career change, and so she was experienced with us, but not experienced in the role. So we maybe could have looked to say, gosh, that's something that could have been a weakness. But as we looked to our partners, so when we had our implementation partner in Infor, and then as Brian came on board, we were really upfront to say, we have a project manager that's newer and greener, and we're gonna need some coaching. And that's something that, as you do this work, you can't just assume that she knows everything. And I would say it was, the relationship that developed and the movement forward, again, with a different scenario, we could have seen different things, but I really appreciated the partnership on that PM side.
Worked out well, it really did.
Yeah.
Cheryl and I still stay in touch.
Good, I'm really glad to hear that. And I would say on the project manager side, and some of these things I'm talking about, they're not all, we've done a lot of projects, so there's different things. If there's a project manager on the vendor side that is somebody you don't think is doing the work you need them to, speak up fast. We've had projects where we waited 6 months and it's a bad idea. If they're already, not producing, project roadmaps, they're not coming to meetings on time, they're not facilitating the meetings. Like, if the project manager can't do those things, you're in trouble. And you need to speak up early, speak up fast, and you need to ask for a swap. And if you don't, you're just going to create that chaos or have that swirl a lot longer. So.
Fair enough. Ready to move on to process?
I have a quick question. In regards to people, for your change management, how many people were impacted with this change that you had to basically teach the new?
Sure.
So how many people are impacted by the change? Is that true?
Yeah, so we have about 14,000 people at Marshfield Clinic Health System. About 1,000 to 1,200 are providers. The rest are frontline staff as well as shared services. So in terms of the volume, all of those people don't use FSM, right? So our requisitioner batch was probably our largest batch of people, which is probably somewhere between 500 and 1,000 in terms of what we were influencing there. The finance and accounting side was much smaller in terms of the people who were just inside of that office. But what I would say is, even though if there's 600 requisitioners, the process changed for everyone. So even though the doctor doesn't requisition anything, they don't go ask to order anything, they had to understand the workflows and the processes that shifted. And so the level of understanding they had to have was much different. They didn't have to be hands to the keyboard, but the fact that their cost center changed, or when they're asked to fill this form out, they actually have to use this instead of that. So there are all those components that go well beyond just hands to the keyboard that, I would say 14,000 people, we had to consider 14,000 people and what the impact would be.
On a process, one of the things that a lot of folks take advantage of when they move to CloudSuite is to address their current processes. Invoice approval, rec approval, capital approval. Did Marshfield do this as well?
Yeah, and you might know more about the details of some of this than me, but what I would say is we probably did a little less of it than we could have. And that might be because we also changed out our GL during all of this. So in addition to moving, I saw that face, in addition to moving from S3 Lawson to FSM, we changed the GL at the same time. So that in its nature created some changes in processes, right? But we didn't blow up the capital process. We didn't blow up, full requisition process. And I wish, but there's no way we could have put this product in the time frame. I think we'll talk a little bit more about where we did follow standards, but process-wise, between that and the fact that we were doing 2 acquisitions, the EHR change, you remember, we were kind of boxed in even on some of our changes because of the fact the EHR was coming in right behind it, and that interplay, the interplay on the supply chain side really caused us some boxing out. So
yeah, and it kind of goes to the next question I have for you is, did you look to Infor and RPI for best practices when it came to changes? And I'd say, yeah, you did.
Absolutely we did, and it's a mantra that still stays today. I do think This was the leading project in terms of the first one where we ended up going through this concept, but we used the 60-30-10 model, where in every meeting and every discussion, we expected to come out of this with about, with 60% of of the work out of the box. Whatever Infor tells us, whatever RPI tells us, is we're just taking it out of the box. 30%, up to 30% could be configured, where we would allow for some minor changes, right, that maybe our team could learn how to do, and less than 10% really being custom. And they did an audit for us at the end, and I think we were over 86% out of the box, and maybe under 10% was configured custom, and then like 3 or 4. It was a real small amount that we ended up doing custom. That was a huge culture change for our organization. I don't know about your organizations, but ours thinks we're the unicorn, right? We're a unicorn. We're different. Nobody's like us. We really used this to shift mindset across leaders and frontline folks to accept the fact that we're buying this platform because lots of other people use it and because a lot of other people have been successful, and we have to take those learnings whenever we can and move that forward.
We already talked about project management a little bit already, but the whole process of project management and the implementation methodology, how did that go for the project?
Yeah, I would say we started out with a process that was a little less structured than we were expecting. So we were expecting a more structured kind of, we'd come in and we'd know how we were doing things, and it wasn't like that to start. We hadn't done this before, we kind of, I think in some respects, expected that our partners had done it more than they had. I mean, I think the fact that even at this user group, a lot of the people here have not moved to FSM yet. I mean, so we're 1 year past our implementation, 3 years past our start, and there's still lots and lots of people moving. We were under the impression, maybe it was our own impression, that many, many more people had done this than we thought. So I think because of that, we were part of a learning process that we didn't know we were part of. So that shaped up, right? You can use project management tools, and that turned around. As you know, and you guys were not part of our initial work, right? But we did have the opportunity to kind of refocus and make some changes in how we ran our implementation. RPI did come in at that point. I would say that ability to have additional resource, as we were able to tap on your part, really helped us push the pedal to the metal, and in those last 4 months kind of hit the goals that we had to hit. So from that standpoint, I think, again, project management and the process and having that structure was really important.
Okay. Single biggest change you made from processes, S3 to CloudSuite?
Yeah, so on this is one where I think if my counterparts in finance and supply chain were here, this would be a good question for them, but I asked them, so that's why I do have some notes so I don't mess with that for them. But on the supply chain side, they did mention the integration of mobile supply chain was really the game changer on that front in terms of being able to pick on the handhold and track delivery. So those are things we did not have access to and we're not using previously with S3 or any manual process from that perspective. Contracting and procurement wise, it really was putting the contract at the center. That was a huge change for us. We weren't fully connected, so that connection between contracting and procurement has really elevated, and that's been a big change that's been really welcome. I think structure relations was a big recent win, and then I did ask for anybody who has grants and gifts. So Deb, we got Deb to weigh in. So this is very specific, so I have to look at my notes because I'm not in the grants and gifts business every day. But for her, burdens, recording revenues, and generating invoices, so those 3 things, all within the ERP system, are the biggest change that have hit our grants and gifts area. Previously, we used spreadsheets. We did everything outside of any system. And so this was really been a nice shift for her and her team in order to have some streamlined work.
The other side of the coin, single biggest struggle.
Sure. So in terms of process, the biggest struggle, the biggest process for us, struggle process is our requisition approvals. So that was a really big change for our organization in terms of how that worked. So working through that process, we've made some really big strides, and it was a worthwhile struggle to make the change and to influence change. I would say that we still have a remaining more of a technology than a process issue related to our approval matrix, but that's aside. So kind of on top of all of that requisition approval section. The other struggle I already mentioned, but really was that training side. So when do you fit that in, and how do you make sure people can pay attention when they don't even know what they're trying to pay attention to? They don't know their workflows that are going to change. So I would say those process-wise were kind of the two highlights that come to mind.
Fair enough. Final thoughts on process?
The other part of the process I think that sometimes gets left out, because we're talking about after the decision is made to move and then you're implementing. And I don't know the mix. I don't know if we have a mix of vendors and customers that are in here, but this is something I plug this always, and it's not just about this particular implementation. The other part of process that can trip you up every time as a customer is that lack of connection between the sales process and contracting process, you laughing, and the implementation process. So that concept of, and I'll give all of our large implementations, we can get this to some effect. So this isn't only a reflection on this project. In this particular case, the sales process, our executives heard the words, you can implement this in 12 to 14 months. So what do you think the expectation was for our implementation? If the range was 12 to 14 months? 12 months, right? It was written in our contract that we would be 14-month implementation, so that was the bounds. But honestly, 14 months would have been considered well, I guess you did okay. So that was the sales process. And they spent months with us, right, before, and learning about us and assessing and giving us that recommendation. They knew we would do a GL change. We started off, we're getting ready for our kickoff, and I think and again, you guys were not part of our world yet at that time. I'm sure you would have been even harsher with us. Our implementation partners got our work, and they said, well, this is like a 16 to 18-month implementation. And we said, well, no, it's a 14-month implementation. Who told you that, right? How are you going to do that? I don't know. How are you going to do that? So that really created a lot of churn in the beginning, because I didn't have any ability to go back to the board of directors of the Marshfield Clinic Health System and tell them it wasn't going to be delivered in 14 months. They gave us a budget and they gave us a timeline, and they expected, and they gave us, we had KPIs to hit. And so Infor knows this, that I've been very upfront. There really needs to be, and I would say if you're a customer side, with any vendor you're working with, ask for either their implementation people, if that's who you will be using, or your implementation partner to be at the table before you sign the contract, and to fact check it with you, and not just right before you sign the contract. Because if I would have told my boss, 2 weeks before we signed the contract, when I talked to some implementation people, that it was 2 to 4 months off, that was not the time to deliver that news either. So I have encouraged every vendor I work with to get their implementation partners and people involved early in the contracting process, so you can have a real contract, because you're just going to set everybody up for false expectations if you don't have that. So that's my other plug on process. And I give it anywhere I go.
Let's move on to technology. On technology side, you were on-prem before this implementation, right?
We were, yep.
Okay. What did you find to be the largest impact from going from on-prem to the cloud on the tech side?
The technology side, really, I think the upgrades are our biggest change or challenge for my technology team. We were on S3. We held upgrades a long time and decided when the business was ready, and we probably thought they were never ready, and so we would wait and wait and wait. So I would say initially the move, and at the time we implemented, there were still some fairly big changes every month. So I know now they're moving to this more kind of twice a year, bigger changes, and then every month is more of a maintenance. But we were at that stage where we implemented March 2022, and there were fairly disruptive changes coming to us every month. And that was something that we weren't prepared for, but we knew that because we had some good partners who told us we would not be prepared for that. And so, we really just contracted services to teach us how to manage that service ongoing. I don't know how else you do it unless, again, you have a team that's really used to, handling that. But that's been disruptive. But I think we're doing better. You guys, our goal, we told them we were going to hire them to teach us that, but the goal was to not use them forever. And so by doing that,
work ourselves out of it.
Thank you. Yes.
Your team's doing well in that aspect. What changes in the makeup of your technical team did you have to make going from on-prem to cloud?
Sure. So we continue right now to outsource all reporting, and I can talk more about reporting. You'll hear me mention it a few times. So that's a change. Our business partners could do their own reporting, and that's been a big change. So now we outsource that to really good people. But again, we like to be self-sufficient, probably not on a core function, outsourcing that. And then the other thing is we're using this as an opportunity to look at our FTE internal model versus outsourcing. I think the Gartner metric is that typically technology areas outsource about 40% of their labor on applications. So if you're supporting an application, about 40% of that labor or resource is external. and about 60% is internal. We are like a 90-10, 95-5, meaning we have all FTE, internal FTE, working on this project. This shift has meant, obviously, our internal FTE haven't had the knowledge, and we're bringing that up to speed. So we have been, using a partner a little bit more. And I will tell you, as people if people leave, so we just had a departure on our team, we didn't backfill it. So we're looking to say, how do we use that opportunity do we outsource more? Which is kind of odd, because you might think, well, you should keep it inside. But the nature of this work, by having that outsourcing, lets us flex up and down, obviously, in some of those spaces and use it. But I will tell you a partnership story. So when we started this journey, we've worked together 2.5, 3 years. But I would just encourage whoever your implementation partner is to gain that trust, because basically we went to DJ and we went to, we came over to you guys and we said, help us figure out how much we need internal versus external resource. And I told the manager that on my team. I said, go talk to RPI and have them help you set that model. And she said, they're going to write themselves a blank check. They're just going to say, of course you need all these outsourced. And I said, no, they won't. I said, we've been working together for all this time. I know what they're going to do. They know us, and they're going to help us understand realistically what do we need, and what makes the most sense to have internal versus external. And so find those trusted partners, because going by yourself and trying to figure that out doesn't make any sense. You guys are working with people all day long, and so all year long. So using that expertise is something that we've been able to do on that front.
Cool. A lot gets made of the savings made in the tech area from going on-prem to cloud. Did you find that to be true?
I don't know. Does anybody in this room find it when you move to the cloud, it's cheaper? Okay. It's a really funny story that they tell you when you're moving. But I will say, so no, not specifically with this project, and probably maybe with any project, has it been cheaper? And I think two things because of that. One is we actually owned our own data center up until like 4 weeks ago. We just sold it, but we've owned our own data center. And we benchmarked our costs in that data center. So all of our hosting internally was done there, and we run our data center at a cost much lower than the industry average. So already we were starting at a cost for hosting that was much lower. So then you move to the cloud, and I haven't found a vendor yet that when they move you to the cloud, they charge you less, right? So your costs actually, what you're paying to access the same functions goes up by quite a bit. And so that offset, it definitely wasn't a savings. But what I would say is you can't really look at it that way. If we had stayed on S3, there's a whole, like those things I talked about before that were value, none of those would be available to us in S3. So you're really, in my mind, we're moving because we need to stay on the current platform. We have to be able to use the tools. We built in KPIs because our board for any large implementation asks us to do that. So we committed to supply chain reduction, inventory reduction in supply costs, an increase of revenue, and an increase in labor productivity. We committed to a pretty significant chunk of dollars for those 4 things. We wouldn't have been able to do that staying on S3, right? So there's value to moving, like it's almost not even moving to the cloud is the story, but the platforms that's where they're going, right? And so to take advantage of those things, you've got to go. And the value we found came from the fact of you have to take advantage of the increased functionality that's in there. If we would have just used FSM to do exactly the same things we were doing in S3, it would have been a net negative move, right? So you have to commit to making that shift in your people, your processes, et cetera, because moving the technology only, you won't just get value from that perspective.
Yeah. I think you just answered my next question, actually. How would you compare S3 compared to FSM?
Well, I've got a lot to tell you there.
Okay, fire away.
So S3 to FSM, I think the positives, our supply chain team, we could not take this away from them if we tried. One of our supply chain director said this is 10 times improvement over what I was doing in Lawson. So for him, both what his team is doing, but also the fact that he's, as a leader, there's dashboarding. And he wasn't someone who came in with familiarity and had used Lawson for 30 years. So he came in and came to this organization and was like, what are you giving me with this Lawson tool? I can't find anything, right? So for him, the dashboarding is great on the supply chain side. all of our supply chain folks, actually, our supply chain people like the out-of-the-box reporting, and they're getting everything they need. I think part of it has to do with, well, I won't even guess as to why, but the data they need is available in the out-of-the-box reports. So it's interesting, we sit in meetings where we listen to how things are going. Our supply chain people look at our finance people and say, what's wrong with reporting? It's great. So, in comparison there, they actually would say they would rank it much better in terms of even reporting, than
In the S3
than the S3 product, which is interesting. On the downside, and again, we had the presentation earlier today, on the finance side, reporting has been really, really, really difficult. There's acknowledgement on our finance side that the wealth of information that's there is like endless. But I would say, and I get reinforced through this, but our CFO said, I just need you to export everything into an Excel document for me because that's what I need. And to me, that was a sign of a pretty big failure, right? Because if you give your CFO a really, really nice solution, and then what she asks you to do is to find a way to automate that out into Excel, there's a failure. So that's where we have been. I would say our teams are learning. We've out, she would say that, but then we'd say, Kathy, tell us, what do you need? We'll have RPI build any report you need. And it wasn't really, it was the drilling around, right? It was the ability to say, I know this is what I need right now, and then I have 3 more questions this month on that, and I need to, so all of that has been still a struggle. I have gotten positive feedback that people are starting to learn some of the, intricacies. I think, the fact that there's 3 different tools that you can use kind of to do the reporting, that's hard. You mentioned, Burst, we have App Studio, and then I think there's just the simplest tools that happen right.
Yeah, it's a fairly new one, the GL report writer.
The GL report writer. So I think that's been, as a comparison, a step backwards we've had to kind of swallow. And I would say we just expected there would be better reports. So, you expect it's all there because you tout how much is there. These guys know I'm biased towards the fact that there's so many opportunities and so many companies who've come forward to say, hey, you can hire us and we'll do your reporting. We'll get you this. I mean, some of you sat in this room earlier today and you watched a beautiful set of interaction and report outs. I really don't want to do that. I want it to be in Infor. I have heard, I was encouraged, it'll take time, but I was encouraged in May when I was at the Infor Connect in St. Paul that there's acknowledgement that reporting didn't get the attention it needed. So I'm hopeful that there'll be some attention there and that the teams will be able to be in that space and do the work. We haven't fully recovered into that space yet. I don't know how many reports you guys have written for us that only you could write for us. So that's definitely been a struggle. It's not over yet, but I'm encouraged by either pathways where we're going to have to just outsource, not have you guys write for us in there, but really go for a company who can do the work, or something else as a change there.
What were you using S3 for reporting?
What were you using for S3 and reporting?
Well, I think just Excel for the most part, to be honest, is what they were using. We have a data warehouse, and so a lot of our automated reports would come out of there in terms of some of those pieces. But honestly, I think a lot of it was Excel, and it was that accessibility to the data, right? So some of that is just, and I at the beginning was really kind of a hard. I would say to my partners in finance, guys, you got to get rid of your Excel. There's a tool here. I need you to show me that you can use it here. And it was really talking to you guys, talking to Infor, and being told they really can't do the things they were being asked to before. So that, I do think that's one of those things too. If we had been told earlier, we wouldn't have tried to fight so hard to make it happen. We would have just waited. We would have said, all right, that's not a mature set yet. We would have still moved, but we wouldn't have. I think we maybe wasted a lot of effort trying to create things that
When ready yet?
Wasn't ready yet. So that's another piece. And I've transparently talked to Infor. Just be as honest as you can with us. Don't try to sugarcoat it. If you would have told me in 2020 that this is not a strong point, we might have made some different decisions in how we brought things to our data warehouse and maybe using some of our resources internally to do some of that development. But we really were kind of under the impression, whether it was our own impression or how it came, but that was going to be available to us just right in these dashboards and right there for them.
Fair enough.
So I think I had to make sure if I got representation off of all those teams, make sure I didn't, this is a few things, I guess, again, have you guys moved yet? Not moved? Most haven't. You've moved. So some of this might be resonating, some might, and you guys can know. The other piece is just the difference is for whatever reason, FSM continues to be a slower experience than S3. So people wait. And this is an interesting one because slowness is an IT professional's least favorite word, right? What in the world does slowness mean? Thank you, slowness. So I believe my business partners when they tell me they have slowness. I do. We've allocated resource to go spend time, watch the slowness, quantify it, work with work with Infor. I don't always get the best buy-in to do that work because they're getting slowness, but they're at month end and they're trying to just get closed and they don't want to stop, have somebody be like, hey, Pritam, I need your help. Can you come watch this for a while? They just have to plow through. So, that's one where I think we still could help ourselves and we could troubleshoot and we can figure that out, but that out of the box. And then the other thing I just would mention, role development. So the provisioning roles were something that we had to spend more time on than we thought. So again, you'd agree with that, right? And I think some of that just, we just expected that to be part of the 60%. Like everybody in healthcare particularly has these same roles, same jobs, same things to deliver. I think some of that's a maturity piece. I'm a glass half full person, so my benefit of doubt is enough people just hadn't made it through to kind of get some of that standardization. People implementing now may have a better experience than us, but that's kind of where that sits.
Fair enough. Final thoughts before we take questions.
So, and it seems like this is mostly customer sided, not as many vendors, but I think one of the things I think of on the technology side, and I actually heard it in both the presentations earlier today, so this is somewhat of a plea to vendors, but also thinking of customers. I hear, and this happens at any conference I'm at, vendors touting, this is a really great approach because you don't need IT. This is a really good approach because you don't need IT. You don't need to rely on IT. I would ask every vendor, and if you guys, when you talk to your vendors, ask them to stop saying that. What that does is creates a wedge between vendors who your business people trust and the IT teams. Because I guess it was interesting, one of the presentations said you don't need IT, but you need a SQL server. I don't know too many business people who know how to go grab a SQL server by themselves and stand it up and have it functional. I think you need IT. I think for us, at least our security review process, our AI governance process, those two things run through IT. And so again, if you try to, say you don't need IT, you're cutting out that piece. The other, and again, at our organization, we actually help funnel through capital and operating expense approvals. So if the business is the one approached, or that's, you don't need IT for this, there becomes a problem there. So that's my other plug on the technology side is I want to keep the progression forward, that IT is not an enemy of anyone. They're not the people there to say you can't do something. In healthcare, we're there to make sure our CISO always says we got to stay out of the news. Everybody would like to stay out of the news, right? But doing a security review isn't meant to add 4 weeks to a process. It's meant to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where what we're buying doesn't have all the components that are needed. So I guess that would be my other reflection on technology is continue as some of you might be in technology, some of you might be on the business side. I think the closer collaboration and relationships that the business, the vendor, and IT can have together, that's when you're really shooting on all cylinders. And whatever business you're in, you're making a difference there by having that collaboration. So that's my other reflection on the technology side.
Okay. Ready for questions?
Of course.
All right. Questions from anybody in the audience?
So from when you first went live with FSM to today, has Infor released any more reports that are helping you bridge that gap?
So from live till today, have they released any more reports that are helping you out?
More have been released. So again, in May when we were at the Infor Connect, they showed us, I think, 4 to 8 reports that came out, and I think they're shooting for up to 25. So there is a focus. I was able to kind of interact with the person kind of working through that. And then I mentioned our grants and gifts person. She was there with me, and she, from the business lens, was very encouraged by what she was hearing and seeing. So interestingly, it was one interesting part is they were, and this was healthcare specific. I think that's a healthcare specific focus. Maybe not. There were a lot of healthcare people there. But the one piece of encouragement I gave Infor at that point is be careful, because they were going to be bringing focus groups together to help build those. It was just to be careful on how you do that. So if you have somebody from a 200-person organization saying, these are exactly what I have to have, and then you go off and run, versus a 20,000-person organization or a 400,000-person organization. So just trying to make sure that blend and that balance happens. Obviously that's the danger of canned reports. So there's been improvement. I think, honestly, the acknowledgement that it wasn't good, it was the biggest step, right? It was like an addict. It was the biggest step in the right direction, just, admitting this is reality, and now we can put resources for it publicly and seek help and have interaction. Yeah.
Other questions?
I think you were saying that maybe I got this wrong, but there's the updates or the new releases that come out, introduce new functionality, change functionality, and there was some potential problems with that. Could you maybe clarify what you meant? I mean, are you in multi-tenant or where releases are just pushed out, or is there a test period where you can go in and test first, or how does that work?
So your questions around this, the CUs that they come out with, how frequently and how severe, and then how do you get them?
Well, how do you validate them before they become?
And how do you validate them before you put them into production? Fair enough.
And Brian might have more details on that, but I would say from a high level view, we do have, we have a test, a train. I think that when we contracted, you got 3 environments, and we actually ended up contracting extra for a 4th. That may be just included now. It might be part of what they do, because that 4th tenant is where we would take in the
pre-prod.
Right,
Yeah.
and so that wasn't part of the original deal, or even how they expected us to do the work, and weren't even trying to do the planning at that was kind of hard. But the impact, 2 impacts, and Deb, one of our business partners, highlighted this. Some of what you do gets overwritten. So when something comes in and changes, you have customization. So anything in that top, when I said, the 60-30-10, anything in the 10 for sure is subject to potentially be a problem, and even stuff in the 30. So the only things that are truly safe, I would say, are the 60% that's out of the box, if that's how you would go at it. So you have at risk, and again, we have less than 20% custom configured probably, but that puts at risk every change. And so people either have to go and redo those things. And so that's been taxing. And again, the presentation we heard earlier today did make mention of the fact that it's very rare that, depending on the update at this point, it's hitting less and less, or they're learning a little bit more about what they're impacting, I think, and finding better ways to bucket. So maybe only in that twice-a-year update are you having to do as much of that rebuild or redo, and hopefully maybe in those month-to-month updates, it's more small. And I don't know if that's what you're seeing as you guys are working through that.
Well, they're just starting that, right, to get them smaller and smaller.
Okay.
But, and a couple things towards that. One is multi-tenant, absolutely. In your cloud, you're multi-tenant. It is a forced march, by and large. You're getting those changes coming your way. And you can't say, nope, not this month, I'll wait till next month. They're coming. So that's a big change for organizations to be aware of that and have their staff ready to address that. The pre-prod, or that area where you can bring those changes in ahead of time, so you can evaluate them, see what they're going to do to your organization, and plan ahead. That happens, and that could be a little off marker, about 2 weeks ahead of time. Gives you eval time before they show up. It's a monthly basis, right? It's coming at you, yeah. So it's pretty well constant. That's why they've gone to a model of
2 weeks, yep.
Yeah.
You have to be a well-oiled machine. So before you could be like 6 months worth of figuring it out and being kind of soft and nice, and then in the last 2 weeks you gave the business 2 weeks to do their steps or whatever. It's the whole machine happens in those 2 weeks, and you just get really well orchestrated.
Yeah, and we've been helping you with that. Our team's been helping you with that. But the other side of that is, I think that's why Infor's gone to twice a year with the big ones, and just patches in betweens, because they understood the stress that it puts on an organization. Other questions?
During your implementation, obviously you have your production environment. How many environments did you use during the FSM implementation? Did you use your train and test? Did you just use one? Did you use more?
How many environments did we use during the implementation? I think we had 4. Prod, train, dev, test, like pre-prod. So, but we had a whole 10 strategy around that. It wasn't my end of the game, quite honestly. But we were able to move things around so that prod was pristine. We'd load things into pristine. that, once they're, that was signed off on and that was that. And when in pristine, we'd always copy out of pristine to refresh. So there's a whole tenant strategy around that to make use of those things. And regular refreshes, so people are using good data for testing and good data for development of training materials as well.
And was FSM the only implementation going on at that time? The reason I ask, we use Global HR for our HR data, and we do a lot of implementations in our training environment, and we don't want to overlap and step on each other's toes as we're doing the FSM project.
For Marshfield, when we put in FSM, it was the only modules going in for Infor. Been in that situation with other clients where GHR is already up. And your question was, were any other implementations going on? But so for Marshfield, it was just FSM going on. Other cases where you have GHR already up, your shuffle becomes a little bit differently when it comes to your tenant strategy. And that's a lot of times where pre-prod comes in handy too. But yeah, our tech guys figure that out, and because you're always playing with those to make sure you're not stepping on each other, overriding development. There's always things going on, especially after you're live. You have to be very careful. And
that's a space where you have to be an advocate for yourself as well. I feel like sometimes our implementation partners, they knew what was going on because they've done this before, and our business partners would be saying, well, where can I go and not go this week? Like, what's going on? And so we kind of came to a good agreement where we had a really nice, colorful document that was always committed to being updated, and that was the one go-to place. And it was a very complicated view, but it had all the tenants, it had the time frames, it had what you could do when, and and we kind of turned it around to that what can you do when versus the technical view, and that's an important part. However, like for the technology teams to be trusted partner by business, we also have to turn our artifacts around into ways that the business can digest them and use them. Because if we just push out everything to the business and be like, yeah, this is the tenant strategy, and they're like, what's a tenant, right? I mean, so I think it's that making sure the languages are overlapping so that you're accomplishing the goals
That's a good point.
with the various audiences. And you guys did a really nice job of partnering with us for that.
I think you brought up supply chain, but has your finance and accounting people seen a lot of benefits on the GL side from going from S3 or FSM?
So your question is, did finance and accounting
Get a lot of benefits.
get a lot of benefit from moving?
On the GL particularly. So we had to shift GL. So as you can imagine with the growth strategy, we had a couple things. We were a clinic-only system, and then we had to transition to really be in a hospital-based system, which is a really different accounting structure, and we were still using an old structure. So 100% the GL transition, they saw benefit from, because we were trying to use an old, hierarchy or structure to do business when that's not how we were doing business anymore. So that was yes. In terms of, again, just the regular move, I think, and the interesting thing is we've had retirements, we've had people, move and shift jobs. I do think as people come in and they're learning this tool has a much easier learning rate, onboarding and those kind of things. So I do believe, and we did just get a new VP of finance, and she, as she's looking at, especially now that we did structure relations, that piece is one that she's telling me. So for example, there was a piece before we just fixed this in the last 4 weeks from a year ago, but we were getting errors in the I don't even remember how many lines, but 100 every week, and now it's down to 10 to 15 every week in terms of some of these pieces. So there's some things that we chose not to do in our initial implementation that we're still kind of cleaning up and optimizing, and so it seems like more of those were on our finance side. And so I do think incrementally our finance folks are definitely seeing value more and more as we move forward. And I would say, just a little plug on the GL side, I watched your face when we made that change. I still reflect, it's one of those reflections I make because I didn't dwell on this fact, but when we moved, when we missed the 14-month implementation date, and we ended up about 4 to 5 months later for our actual implementation date, I do really believe part of that was because we were mixing a GL and this transition. And I always wish, could they have told us to do it differently? The hard part is we couldn't, I don't think, have done this GL change in Lawson because of the dimensions and how we're doing. So it's not that we could have even done this GL in Lawson. So we had to get to FSM. We couldn't wait 12 months to implement and then 6 to 8 more months to implement. Just the business side of things in terms of waiting 2 years to use the GL that was going to allow us to run our business. So we were just in this kind of sticky, stuck position. So we had to combine them. If anyone else has any other choice, I don't think I would recommend combining a GL complete restructure like we did with this. It just feels like the conversion and all those pieces got messier than they needed to be and ended up creating higher risk. That ended up hitting us. Like that risk became true for us. And I don't think anyone else has ever been hit with that. You know, the risk hasn't come true for others in a way that it was for us in terms of kind of how it destabilized some things for us.
We got a few minutes left. Do you have any other questions?
Just out of curiosity, how big is your internal IT team that was dedicated to the project, roughly? I know some people are probably part-time, full-time.
So
Yeah.
how big was the IT team overall for the project?
For this project. So within our finance and supply chain set of tools, we have 5 analysts and then a manager. So at Marshfield Clinic Health System, we have 2,500 applications overall, right? And so and in the finance and supply chain space, there's probably 80 to 100. So it's not as if these 5 analysts are just on FSM, but they have our point of sale system, they have MAC, they have all the associated things that let that run. So the 5 FTE, we're actually running with 4 FTE now, and we're outsourcing work with RPI. Now that we obviously grab integration time and we would grab infrastructure time, but that core application team, that's how big we were. And they didn't work on the project full time. They had to keep the rest of the thing running. But yeah, I can't remember the FTE. Yeah, I don't remember. I mean, obviously in our FTE plan, I don't remember the FTE that we kind of carved out or dedicated. If it was 2 out of the 5 FTE is what our thought was. That's probably about what we probably thought from a project perspective.
Yeah, thank you. That's good.
Yeah.
Any last questions? Well, I'd like to thank everybody for coming today and listening to the presentation. Specifically, I'd like to thank you, Sara, for sharing your thoughts on this. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's great. We finally got to meet in person. We did our whole implementation without
like
ever meeting.
a COVID implementation.
We just met this morning in person for the first time. So,
That's awesome.
I mean, I only know this much of you. Thank you, guys.